I was asked to talk about how to be a change maker because of my experience as a medical director of health and wellness innovation at Aetna and bringing mindfulness to Aetna. And I want to talk about getting real about this because I am at a point in my career when I'm not interested in the veneer anymore. I want to empower you to go further in what you're doing. You would not be here unless you're trying to make change in the world. And I hope that what I have prepared to say will be an offering to that you can take it and, manifest your vision, your dreams. To start with, here's the story that I experienced. So I was hired by Aetna out of Harvard School of Public Health after doing my thesis on population health management and the ROI of wellness programs at the workplace, right before the Great Recession. Had I not been paperworked maybe a month later, I would have never gotten that job. So I slipped in there, and it's my first corporate job, and all of a sudden, instantaneously, all the money just evaporated. Here was a $30 billion company, 18 million people enrolled in the health insurance, and there was no money to be found anywhere. It all boiled up somewhere else. And not to mention, the person who facilitated my hiring, the chief medical officer, Troy Brennan, left for CVS, Caremark, to be their CMO, where he is today. Awesome guy. But a week after I started, my mentor disappeared. And I was working 5 a.m. in the morning, California time, to like 3 p.m. every day on the phone to Hartford, where my boss was and all of my department was. So it was very, very challenging socially and influence-wise to leverage anything that I was or had to offer from that very remote, kind of isolated. And I remember the first conference call that I ever was on. It was my entire department, and they were all talking about some wellness initiative and that kind of thing. And I was in my kitchen listening to this at 5:30 in the morning, and I was hyperventilating because they were all so smart and so articulate, and I was super intimidated by what they had to say. And I was like, I can't think that fast. I can't say anything smart here. I have nothing to offer. And I remember the first time I went off mute and I said some little comment, and literally at the end of my sentence, I had no more breath, and so I had to go back on mute and just like breathe again. I was like, oh my God, that was scary. So it was just like I put myself in there, I jumped back out, and it was scary as hell. So this is my sort of deep water immersion all of a sudden in corporate America and how it operated, and there's good and bad of that. One is that I didn't get conditioned to the environment of Hartford. I didn't know any better. And so as I started to put things in place, childhood obesity programs, well-being kind of lifestyle programs, smoking cessation, looking at data, that kind of thing, I started to see an opportunity for my own personal agenda, which is nobody is mindful. There's no mindfulness programs. These stress reduction programs online are crap. They don't do anything for people. The pre and post on it was, how do you feel? Do you feel better? And they're like, yeah, I feel better, performing to the survey, for those of you who do a lot of metrics. And so I wanted something with some teeth. And I had been, when I was at Harvard, I had been to the MBSR conference, and I was really impressed with the evidence base that was rising out of this community. And I was like, well, first and foremost, I consider myself a scientist, doctor, somebody with public health interest, so why not bring all of that in? And so I remember my first pitch deck for mindfulness at work kind of stuff was to my boss and my peers, and it was like crickets, much like Estes was talking about. I was like, and then ta-da, and they were like, okay, next agenda item. And nobody really got it. Nobody understood what I was talking about. What happened? Okay. So I iterated on my initial thinking, and meanwhile I was having good success with other projects and programs and initiatives and tweaks of different things. Because my job was, I was kind of like the goose that laid the golden egg. I made products and programs that sold and that were better than what we used to have. I worked on a big data algorithm, that kind of thing. So my social capital and my influence capital started to rise. And I kept pounding the pavement on mindfulness. I ran into a woman named Kathy because somebody said, hey, there's this woman, Kathy, who does yoga also in Hartford, and she'd be really interested in this. So I talked to her, and she's like, yeah, and then there's this guy, Mark Berlini, who is our president right now, and he's really into yoga, so we should all talk. And then there's this other woman over here in this part of the organization who's into, stuff, And, and I say that because I want to use her as an example of what not to do, unfortunately. I don't remember her name, fortunately, because I don't want to disparage her, but she had been trying to do this for a very long time with no success whatsoever, as well as my friend Kathy and even Mark, who had been kind of marginalized and, thought of, by the executive committee as like too zealot, too dogmatic about it. So I finally got a little team, a tiny little team, Robin and Julie, assigned to me after several, layoffs and years of reorging and things like that. And I told them, I was like, all right, here's what I want to do. I want to do mindfulness. I want you to do a scrub of the literature. I have this much collected myself. I gave them my personal cache of evidence base around mindfulness and yoga. I said, build on it this way, expand that way, that kind of thing. And I want to find a vendor, a group that does this, that we can partner with, that can help us to implement this and develop something, because we don't have money to build this in-house. And so they went out and they found a list of organizations, and we interviewed those organizations, including UMass, who were great, and they'd been doing this way before we did, but they had a very fixed formula that was, even though I respected the dose effect, it was too much to implement at scale. And so we found this little company called eMindful, and I was like, perfect, that's perfect. eMindful sounds like a perfect little, partner and that kind of thing, and they were a startup and that kind of stuff. At the same time, I was concerned because I knew that big, giant Aetna, I'd seen it before, these little startups try to swim alongside the giant ship, and they just get drowned in the wake. They either starve to death because the money doesn't flow fast enough, the sales cycle's too long, or they get bureaucrated to death. And to the credit of this woman here, this brilliant genius woman here, she navigated that she has an expert background anyway, dealing with a lot of shark waters. So I think someone lesser than Kelly could not have handled that. And there were so many moments where I still to this day feel guilty about what I've done to Kelly McCabe. And she knows it. We both know it. But I was under a tremendous amount of pressure, and there started to become this kind of, reputation about me. And you guys talked about woo-woo. It was kind of like not woo-woo, it was cuckoo, because I was a doctor and I should know better, right? And I was coming from Peace Loving, California as well. So I had all this kind of reputation pressure from around, and I kept hearing little things like, oh, the CMO thinks you're crazy. Oh, the CEO heard about this, and he's like, what? And so somebody arranged for me, and I think it was Mark actually, arranged for me to go up to the 14th floor, whatever it was, in the private elevator, with like extra pass, and they have to buzz you in and things like that, to explain to Ron Williams, the current reigning CEO, what mindfulness was. And so I went in there and I laid out my data, I laid out my evidence, that kind of thing. And he still was confused. And he was still very, dubious of me and this little person that was in front of him. And so I took a breath and I said, all right, do you want me to just show you what this is like? And he's like, yeah. And so I said, all right, close your eyes. And I led him through a 2-minute exercise of just watching the engine run. Just lift up the hood. Oh. Okay, and when he opened his eyes, he was like, oh, I get it. I said, that right there, that is what we're going after. That is what we're trying to adjust or have people be aware of, because they're so much better when they know that's going on than when they're inside of it and they're trying to operate from that place. And, a lot of this, I have to say, one of the things that bothers me about mindfulness as an industry right now is that there's this kind of mythology around, well, I did it, and so can you. It's kind of, I have that same problem with like CEOs that write books that, like I was fabulously wealthy and fabulously famous, and so can you if you just follow my recipe. As you probably know, causes and conditions and karma have everything to do with what happens in this world, and it's going to be different for you. So here's what my takeaway is. 3 lessons. Number 1, I think it's generalizable for you to be a good communicator. And what I mean by this is I learned how to make slide decks that were the equivalent of children's books for executives. When you are selling up, when you're pitching up, or to people who have an interest in this, you have to make it not just 5th grade reading level, 3rd grade if you can. Really pictures, lots of pictures, like look what I've done with this slide, right? Like that. People are busy, they're crowded, and you're just not gonna get in there. The second thing is listen. I think when you're passionate about something, you can overcompensate by talking too much, by being too dogmatic, and it just repels people right and left. And to that point, be an inclusive person. The woman that I talked about that was kind of, was into this stuff, she was like, oh yeah, and then there's energy fields and there's tapping, and I was like, that's cool if you're in Marin and you're at a workshop, but if you're in Hartford, be smart about what you say and what comes out of your mouth, that it's palatable to other people, right? So be emotionally intelligent around that. The second thing is, and you guys touched on this a bit, is use evidence. This is an act of compassion. It's saying, I understand that your head and your heart need to come to this, and I'm going to respect and honor that. I'm going to give you every good reason, and I'm not going to be some, dogmatic zealot that you're going to be turned off by just because I believe in this and I want you to. I'm not going to take away your agency, and I'm going to respect your intelligence and your opinion no matter what it is, if you agree with me or not. And then the evidence also is like one of those drop the mic things. It's like, boom, I do not have to be the smartest person in the room. This stuff all can speak for me. I use science for that every day of my life, and I'm very grateful to the researchers, Davidson's work, et cetera, who provide us that leverage. And the third one was a piece of advice, probably the best piece of advice I ever got, which was when I was at Harvard, there was a guy from the Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts. He was an executive there, and he came by and he said, look, my biggest piece of advice for you guys is don't worry about getting the credit for something that you do. You guys are probably the only people in the world besides Kelly and I that know that I started this program at Aetna, and I don't care. I'm okay with it being Mark's thing or whatever, because it really is just about when you have a vision and you want to get it done, it will dismantle you as a change maker. If your ego is in it, or you have to get the credit, or it has to be about you, or you have to have your name on everything, and blah, 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 blah. We have a very egocentric world that we live in, and it gets in the way of people actually being effective to always have to be so self-referential. You lose focus, and the worst part about it is that you're not willing to take a risk. I literally could have lost my job. Literally, there was points where I could have lost my job, and I was okay with that because I had a bigger vision, a bigger reason at hand that I was going for. And if I was so worried about myself, I wouldn't have taken that risk. I wouldn't have gone out. I would have been like, thank you very much, and gone back into my little smoking cessation box. So my hope is that you take this and you go forth and you take these principles and you generalize it to yourself and you say, okay, I've got this one checked off, this one checked. Maybe I need a little more, emphasis over here. Maybe I'm not taking enough risk. Maybe I'm thinking too much of what happens to me. Or maybe I'm not communicating simply and effectively and pithy enough. Those are the things that I hope this list does for you. And I want to say, peer to peer, thank you for your work. Thank you for what you're doing. And let's all make this world a better place.